In war, both the invaders and the invaded end up being victims. Then what would be the best thing we can do for those who are devastated by war? It would be for people to fully realize what the mistakes of the war were, and for them to confess those mistakes.
What would you say is the difference between history and the past? History is a past with some sort of value added to it. But not only excellent achievements are recorded as history, a past that is shameful or a past that was a mistake are also recorded as history. These are probably the teachings from the people before us who wish that these shameful historical events do not repeat themselves. Ryu Seong-ryong's The Book of Corrections is not just the past event of the bygone days, rather, it is part of our history that we do not wish to remember but must.
In 1592, the Japanese invaded the Joseon dynasty unexpectedly and conquered the nation for 7 years. And Joseon could do nothing but stand helpless before them. The national order crumbled and the people wallowed in poverty. This was called the Imjin War. 400 years before our days, there was a person who repented for the mistakes of the royal court. He left a valuable lesson for his descendants. He was none other than Ryu Seong-ryong.
서해 유성룡 선생은 임진왜란 당시에 선도 도체자서로서 전체 전략을 수립을 하고 그걸 따라서 이제 우리나라가 전란을 극복하는데 아주 큰 공을 세웠죠. 물론 이제 그 이후에는 이제 여러 가지 이제 문학 활동이라든가 그런 저술 활동도 활발히 하셔가지고서 수많은 이제 저술이 남겨져 있었다고 합니다. 근데 이제 지금은 이제 그렇게 많이는 남아져 있지는 않고 서해지보고 징비록 그런 등등이 이제 남아 있죠.
After the war, Ryu Seong-ryong returned to his hometown and quietly concentrated on his writing. Before his death at the age of 66, he ignored the king's persuasions to resume his government office. Instead, he put all his might into recording the shameful accounts of the war for future generations, without leaving or adding any facts. He left many writings, extraordinary both in their historical and literary scope. His recordings of first-hand experiences in the war and managing problems as its supreme commander are especially outstanding. This is the Book of Corrections, or Chingbirok. The Book of Corrections starts off with Japanese envoys going back and forth from Joseon to Japan, 6 years before the Imjin War. They had been spying on Joseon long beforehand, but the Joseon court chose to ignore the opinions of the minority who discovered this plot. Japan finally succeeds in invading Joseon dynasty through the relationship with Ming China in a supposedly fair fashion. Not only was Joseon unprepared for the invasion, it did not even have a strong national defense system. Joseon was helpless against the Japanese, who had already imported muskets from the West. Even the king abandoned his royal palace and ended up running away. No generals were seen who were willing to fight against the enemy. In the midst of the war, Ryu Seong-ryong fully recorded the bitter reality and accounts of that time.
징비록은 어떤 의미에서는 당연히 부끄러운 이야기로 가득 차야 되는 그런 속성을 가지고 있습니다. 근본적인 책의 성격. 왜냐하면 부끄럽지 않은 일을 어떻게 뒤돌아보고 반성할 수 있겠습니까? 그 반성을 이 원래 징비라는 말이 시경에서 나온 말입니다. 다시 말하면 과거를 돌아보고 그 잘못된 일을 질책하고 그걸 통해서 미래에 똑같은 일이 반복되지 않는 것을 않도록 노력하기 위한 그런 것을 위한 기록이다. 그렇기 때문에 당연히 징비록은 부끄러운 일로 가득 차야 됩니다.
The Book of Corrections was a record of regret for the mistakes of the war, and Ryu Seong-ryong's spirit helped Joseon get back on its feet. The Joseon army, with nowhere to run, controlled their anger and got back their fighting spirit. Volunteer guerrilla armies, civilians, and Buddhist monks rose up and sacrificed their lives for their country, finally succeeding in driving back the enemy. Joseon further requested relief armies from Ming China and slowly started to win the war. The decisive factor in this war, though, was the naval battles between the Korean and Japanese fleets. Korea crushed 200 Japanese warships with only 12 of their own fleet.
임진을 계기로 해가지고서 우리나라는 이제 국방에 대한 인식이 이제 새롭게 될 수밖에 없죠. 그래서 뭐 새로운 군제를 마련을 하고 새로운 부대도 만들어서 훈련도감이 임진왜란 중에는 임시아문으로 만들어졌다지만은 그 위에 상설아문으로 만들어져서 그런 방어에 대해서 새롭게 이제 인식을 하게 되고 그 과정에서 유성룡의 이제 역할은 이제 상당히 컸던 걸로 나타나고 있습니다.
Perhaps what Ryu Seong-ryong wanted most for future generations of Korea was to keep in mind his advice to learn from past mistakes in history, thereby building a stronger nation for the future.
In the 21st century that we are living in, does history stop at being just an old nostalgic song? The plain fact is that history repeats itself either in the 15th century or in the present days. We must remember that the present exists because of history, a collection of all the passion in the past.